It was my first night alone in nearly 19 years. Not just alone in a room, but alone in a space that was mine. Mine on paper. Mine in silence. Mine in every detail I had chosen without compromise or correction. The apartment wasn't big. A clean, modern loft with warm lighting and polished concrete floors that caught the sun just enough in the late afternoon. I'd filled it with furniture I picked for myself. Soft creams and deep walnut tones, nothing like the cold chrome, and glass Victor always insisted made us look successful. A single magnolia in a slender vase stood on the dining table. I'd bought it that morning. It reminded me of the one that bloomed just outside my childhood bedroom window, before everything in my life became curated for someone else's taste. I was lighting a candle, sandalwood and vanilla, when my phone buzzed. Victor. Of course. So, this is where you're hiding? Text me the address. I'll come see the place. I'm curious what a woman with no income can afford. I should have ignored him, or said I wasn't home. But some part of me, old, bruised, still tethered to needing his approval like oxygen, replied with the address. 15 minutes later, he walked in like he owned the place. He didn't knock. He never did. Victor looked around, hands in the fair pockets of his bespoke suit. The scent of his cologne, that sharp, cedar-heavy blend I once found intoxicating, now made my stomach tighten. "This is it?" he asked, voice echoing just enough to sound amused. "That's your apartment?" He walked past me without waiting for an answer, tapping the marble counter like he was testing its authenticity. "Cute," he said. Then he laughed, not politely, not even cruelly, just entertained, like a man watching a pet try to drive a car, like a child playing house. I stood by the door, one hand gripping the edge of the sideboard. There was a photo on it, not of us, but of my parents. Taken, long ago in a field of poppies. My mother's smile, radiant and soft. She never met Victor. Sometimes I think she would have seen through him faster than I did. He noticed the photo. "Trying to get sentimental, huh?" he said. "This is what happens when you don't have structure. You spiral." It wasn't the words. Not exactly. It was the way he said them. Bored. Like he'd already moved on from me emotionally, but still expected to own the narrative. Then it happened. A knock on the door frame, and a young man in a black vest and name tag stepped halfway inside. "Ma'am?" he asked, respectful and warm. "Your Lamborghini's out front. Would you like us to bring it around?" Victor turned. His body shifted before his face did. "You have a Lamborghini?" I didn't speak. I just looked at him. I didn't need to explain the silent months of selling my jewelry, the commissions I'd taken, the connections I'd quietly rebuilt, the brand design work I'd done under a pseudonym, the fact that I'd paid for the car in full, in cash. Victor blinked, once, then again. He opened his mouth, probably to ask how, but nothing came out. And I didn't offer him the dignity of an answer. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, I saw something in his eyes that had never been there before. Confusion. And maybe fear. "I didn't know," he muttered. You never asked." I said softly. I walked past him, picked up my keys, and handed the valet a folded bill. "Thank you," I told him. "I'll be right down." Victor stood in the middle of the loft, silent. The laugh was gone. I paused at the doorframe, letting the scent of my candle reach me again. Warmth, comfort, identity. "Victor," I said, turning back just once. "Next time you think of laughing at me, remember this moment, and remember that it was your voice in my head that nearly kept me small." Then I closed the door. Gently. Outside, the sun was setting. The city shimmered in orange and gold. The Lamborghini was purring quietly by the curb, sleek, unapologetically powerful. I ran my fingers along the door as I stepped inside, gripping the wheel not like a trophy, but like a steering wheel. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just going somewhere. I was leaving something behind. I used to paint. Not for money, not even for praise. I painted because it made me feel real. Like I was tethered to the world by color and brush stroke. My hands would be speckled in ochre and cobalt by the end of the day, and my little apartment smelled like turpentine and wildflowers from the eye. Open window. That's who I was before Victor. I met him at a gallery opening I'd been invited to by a friend of a friend. I wore a dress I'd stitched myself. Pale blue linen with sleeves that fluttered like moth wings. I remember the way his gaze found me through the crowd, like I was the only person in the room. That was his gift. Making you feel singular. Victor was older, elegant. The kind of man who made rooms quiet when he entered them. He was all confidence and low laughter, always saying the right thing at the right moment. I thought he was brilliant. A tech entrepreneur with 2 startups already. Sold. A man who read poetry and drank espresso from delicate porcelain cups. He told me that first night, "You have something people can't teach, light." I fell like rain. Our early months together were all candlelit dinners and long drives, in his vintage convertible. I was living a dream, and I let it carry me away. When he asked me to move in, I didn't hesitate. Just for a while, I told myself, until I figure out what I really want. But what I wanted blurred beneath what he wanted for me. Or maybe, from me. He suggested I take a break from painting. "You're talented," he said, "but you're constantly exhausted. Let me take care of things for a while." It sounded kind, protective. I didn't realize it was the first brick in the wall. Then came the job. A freelance design gig I loved. Late nights and glowing emails from clients. Victor hated it. He said, it made me distracted, that I didn't need to work anymore, that working was for people without choices. "You're lucky," he told me one evening, as he poured Bordeaux into crystal glasses. "Most women would kill for this life." I gave in. I always did. Soon after, we got married. A small ceremony, at an estate in the countryside, just us and a handful of people he approved of. My mother wasn't there. She had passed the year before, and I wore her ring on a silver chain tucked beneath my dress. I remember fingering it during our vows, wondering if she'd have warned me. By then, I had already stopped seeing most of my friends. He didn't like how they filled my head with ideas. And if I pushed back, even gently, he'd go silent for hours, sometimes days. That silence was a punishment worse than yelling. Eventually, I stopped resisting. I stopped painting, stopped working, stopped calling people back. My world shrank to the size of our home, our manicured, pristine, museum-like home, where I was more decoration than woman. At first I told myself I was content, that this was what adulthood looked like, stability, order, being taken care of. But sometimes I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and find myself staring at the ceiling, heart racing, aching for a brush in my hand, or the hum of my old studio fan. I became an expert at gratitude. I said thank you for the credit cards I couldn't see, balances on. For the car I wasn't allowed to drive outside the city. For the spa days that replaced real connection. For the compliments that came with conditions. There was one moment, a subtle one, that I'll never forget. We were attending a dinner party at his colleague's home. Everyone was talking about travel, and someone asked me if I'd ever been to Santorini. I smiled and said, "It's on my list." Victor chuckled. "She says that, like she has a list." Then he turned to the others. "She's never even had a passport." The table laughed. I laughed too. But inside I felt myself disappear. That was the moment I realized the perfect wife he'd shaped me into wasn't me. She was a disguise. A puppet molded by his words, dressed in clothes he picked, groomed with products he ordered, silenced by luxury. The wedding ring on my finger began to feel heavier, not precious, like a shackle made of gold. I used to wear perfume, jasmine and rose, soft and clean. One day he brought home a different bottle, expensive, overpowering, musky. "Wear this instead," he said. "It suits you more now." I wore it like armor. And some days, poison. Looking back, I see how carefully it all happened. Not with violence, not with shouting, but with suggestion. Subtle withdrawals of warmth, conditional love, gifts with invisible strings. He controlled the money, the home, the cars, eventually my thoughts. But he never touched the photo I kept hidden, the one of me, covered in paint, laughing in front of a canvas. I found it again when I left him, tucked in the back of an old sketchbook, edges curled from time. That girl. In the photo, she had light, and no man, no matter how polished his smile, had the right to dim it. I started preparing for our anniversary dinner 3 weeks in advance. It sounds silly now, the way I obsessed over the little things. Imported saffron, the perfect aged balsamic, the same silver napkin rings we'd used the first year we celebrated. I even steamed the dress. That deep emerald silk one Victor once said made me look like his queen. I lit candles before sunset. Not too many. Victor hated when things looked forced. Just enough to make the room glow like a memory. The roast rested in the oven. The wine, his favorite Cabernet, breathed on the sideboard. And I sat in the soft hush of our dining room, checking the time every 5 minutes, heartbeat sinking. With the grandfather clock he insisted we buy. He was late. Half an hour, then an hour. I sent one text, just "already here. Are you close?" No reply. At the 2-hour mark, I began to worry. Then, as if summoned by dread, I heard the door open downstairs. His footsteps were light, unbothered, as if he were walking into a casual Tuesday night. I stood at the top of the stairs, hands nervously smoothing the front of my dress, and then I smelled it. Not the wine. Not the rosemary from the roast, but something powdery, sweet, foreign, perfume, not mine. He looked up, blinked, didn't flinch. "Oh," he said. "You look nice." That was it. I followed him into the dining room, standing behind the chair he should have pulled out for me, watching him glance over the table like a man inspecting a restaurant menu. "I thought we could eat together," I said. My voice sounded too small in that house. He unbuttoned his cufflinks, slow and detached. "Honestly, I'm not hungry." I swallowed. "Where were you?" He looked up, and for a second I thought he might lie. But he didn't. "I was out," he said flatly, then added, "with someone. I just stood there, waiting." He sighed, the kind of sigh you give when you're tired of repeating yourself. "You've changed," he said, almost thoughtfully. "You're not who I married. And frankly, I think we both know you're not really contributing to this life." The words didn't land like punches. They landed like bricks, one by one. Quiet, heavy, irrevocable. "I cooked for you," I whispered. "I made all your favorites." He glanced at the roast. "I didn't ask you to." And then he walked upstairs. Just like that. Not a fight. Not even anger. Just indifference. When I heard the shower turn on, something inside me cracked. I sat, at the head of the table, staring at the empty plate across from me, the untouched wine, the flickering candle wax dripping down like tears on white linen. I reached for my glass. I'd poured it full out of habit. I held it tightly, like it might keep me steady. Then I saw it. His phone, left on the buffet by mistake. Screen up. A message still open. Her name. A photo. Tonight was perfect. Still taste you on my lips. I dropped the glass. The shatter was sharp, musical, like breaking a spell. Red splattered across the rug, the walls, my hands. I looked down. A small cut on my palm, wine bleeding into blood. Still, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat there, cradling my hand, watching the stain grow. And in that stillness, in that heavy, breathless moment, I realized something brutal and beautiful. He couldn't break me, because he already had. There was nothing left to destroy. That night, I cleaned the glass quietly, wrapped my hand in gauze, ate alone, one bite at a time, in silence. Then I opened my laptop, logged into our joint bank account, the one he once joked I never needed to check because we're fine. It was empty, not just low. Empty. Overdrafted by $214. I checked the transaction history. Dozens of quiet transfers over months. Small amounts. Spread thinly. To accounts I didn't recognize. It wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. He had been building an exit while I was setting the table. That was the moment my voice died. The version of it he had slowly suffocated over years. But something else stirred in its place. Not rage, not panic. Resolve. I walked to the mirror in our bedroom, looked at the woman staring back. The mascara I'd applied for him had smudged slightly under my eyes, giving me a haunted softness. I reached behind my neck and unclasped the silver chain, my mother's ring. I slipped it off, held it in my hand. Then I reached for my wedding ring. It came off easier than I thought. I placed both on the nightstand beside his, next to his cufflinks and cologne, and I made myself a promise. I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't beg. Would disappear so thoroughly, so completely, that he'd mistake my silence for weakness. And then, only then, I would return, and he'd learn what power sounds like. I left before the sun rose. 2 suitcases, 1 old duffel bag, no note, no trace. I didn't cry. I didn't even look back at the house, the high-gloss floors, the soulless marble counters, the curated life Victor called home. It was never mine. I was just displayed inside it. The air outside was cool and silent, like the world itself was holding its breath. I wore an old wool coat I hadn't touched in years, gray, soft at the collar. The one I used to wear to art school, before life became filtered through someone else's lens. I took a cab to a part of the city Victor never went. Checked into a modest inn tucked between a florist and a bookstore. I used my mother's maiden name, signed the paper with hands that didn't tremble. "Ms. Ray," the innkeeper said kindly. "Room 203, month to month if you'd like." I nodded. That night, I slept on sheets that didn't smell like cologne. Just detergent, just peace. For weeks, I barely spoke. I wandered the city in long loops, walking until my legs ached and my mind quieted. I sat in public parks with a small sketchbook tucked under my coat. I'd forgotten how grounding it was, the feel of pencil dragging across paper. I didn't draw anything specific, just movement, shadows, texture, no expectations, no feedback, just expression. Sometimes I'd find myself staring at strangers, a woman on a bench reading poetry, a father twirling his daughter in circles, an elderly man feeding breadcrumbs to pigeons like it was a holy ritual. I envied their quiet lives. their unobserved simplicity. I ate alone, always small meals, warm soups, dry toast, tea in chipped mugs. I didn't listen to music. Silence became my soundtrack. And yet, within that silence, something softened, a loosening inside me, a space I didn't know had been clenched for years. One afternoon, I passed a small corner cafe I'd walked by a dozen times but never entered. The windows were fogged with steam. The door read, Lena's, coffee, crafts, community. It was the community that made me pause. I didn't feel part of anything anymore, not even myself. But something in the handwritten sign, the curve, of the letters maybe, made me open the door. The bell above jingled softly. The place smelled like cinnamon and dried lavender. I ordered tea, sat in the corner, opened my sketchbook, drew without thinking. After 20 minutes, I noticed her, the woman behind the counter, mid-40s, hair pulled back, warm eyes that looked like they'd seen pain and never flinched. She walked over, a second cup in hand. "I made you the wrong blend," she said, setting it down. "This one's better." She smiled like she meant it. I started to protest, but she waved me off. "Trust me," she said. "You look like someone who could use a little kindness." I blinked, then nodded. She left me alone after that. But I came back the next day, and the next. Eventually, we spoke. Her name was Lena. She owned the cafe, with her sister, who lived out of state. She liked artists, said she used to be one before life demanded rent and reality. One day she asked about my sketches. I froze, then handed her the book. She flipped through it slowly, her thumb grazing the edge of the paper like it was something sacred. "These are beautiful," she whispered. "You design?" "I used to," I said. "What stopped you?" I didn't answer. She didn't press. A week later, she slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were mock-ups for a boutique she was opening in the back, a mix of cafe and artisan store. She wanted a brand, a look, a soul. "I'll pay you," she said, "but only if you take credit for your work." I stared at the page. At my name, M. Ray, written in the corner of the proposal. I hadn't seen my name in a signature box in years. I whispered, "Okay." Designing again was like finding oxygen after years of breathing underwater. My fingers remembered before my mind did, the flow, the balance, the intuitive lines. I worked from the little desk in room 203, surrounded by swatches of linen, charcoal sketches, herbal tea, and soft lamplight. Victor never knew this version of me, because I had hidden her too well, buried her under compromise and couture. But Lena saw her. Lena nurtured her. She didn't ask about my past, only where I wanted to go. I began to eat more, speak more, laugh, not loudly, not often, but freely. My wedding ring was still gone, the finger bare and pale, but I wore my mother's ring now, on a chain still but visible, a reminder of roots, of resilience. I stopped checking Victor's social media, stopped rereading the old text messages, stopped rehearsing what I would say if he ever showed up again, because he wouldn't, and even if he did, I would no longer be the woman waiting for him. One night, I walked past a storefront that had been boarded up for years. The windows were dusty, but I remembered it. It was a studio space I'd once leased when I was 22. A dream deferred when Victor convinced me to put childish things away. I found the old lease in an email archive. The landlord was still listed. I made the call. I signed the contract. When I stepped inside again, after all those years, the space was smaller than I remembered. Cracks in the ceiling, faded paint, but it was mine, and the walls didn't talk back. I painted the inside white, bought second-hand furniture, hung Lena's logo near the window as my first completed project. And, for the first time in my life, I breathed without permission. It didn't happen all at once. There was no grand unveiling, no viral success, no applause, just one quiet yes at a time. One line drawn, one boundary kept, one small rebellion against the silence that used to fill my days. Lena's project led to another. A boutique owner in the arts district saw my logo, asked for help with her rebranding. Then came a wellness retreat, a local gallery, a silent chain of word-of-mouth clients who didn't ask for my resume, only my eye. I signed each contract with M. Ray, the name from my mother's side. My side. The only part of me that ever truly felt mine. I didn't put my name on the storefront. I didn't pose for press. I didn't need to. I knew what I was building. And more importantly, why. I took 30% of every job and saved it. Not for clothes, not for validation, for freedom. Within 8 months, I had enough for a down payment on a property. A small neglected warehouse with good bones and bad lighting. Perfect. I bought it in cash. No mortgage, no debt, no cosigner, no man. I painted the walls myself, the same shade of white I'd once used in my old studio sketches. I filled it with secondhand furniture, live plants, and long tables where I could spread out my ideas without apology. There was a chair in the corner, old and velvet green, where I'd sit with a cup of tea and let the light pour through the tall windows. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and pretend my mother was sitting across from me, smiling quietly. When the studio started turning a profit, I went to the dealership. Not to prove anything, but to reclaim the girl who used to sketch dream cars in the margins of her notebooks, a matte black Lamborghini, sleek, understated, unapologetic. I paid in full. The salesman blinked when he read the check. "Do you want to call your husband to co-sign?" he asked. I smiled. "No," I said. "I'm the one who signs checks now." Victor still didn't know where I was. We were separated, not divorced. And as long as he didn't file, I had space to breathe and to plan. I hired a lawyer, a woman named Farah, recommended by Lena's sister. Farah wore power like perfume, subtle but present. She listened more than she spoke, but when she did speak, it was surgical. I gave her everything: old emails, screenshots, copies of financial statements I'd saved before leaving. She raised an eyebrow. "He moved money into offshore accounts under fake business names?" "Yes." She smiled, not cruelly, but with precision. "Then we're not filing for divorce," she said. "We're filing for financial fraud." I blinked. "Is that safe?" "Safer than silence," she replied, "and far more effective." While Farah prepared the case, I kept building, kept designing, kept choosing furniture, fonts, fragrances, not for a man, not for a market, but for the mood I wanted to live inside. One client asked if I wanted to scale, bring on investors, go national. I declined. "I don't need more," I said. "I just need it to be mine." By the end of that year, I had something more powerful than revenge. I had autonomy. I'd been underestimated for so long, even I had forgotten what I was capable of. But the moment that brought it all home, the moment I knew I had become someone else, was the night I walked through the doors of the new loft. It was late. Rain tapped gently against the windows. My shoes echoed across the open space. No photos of a man on the walls. No scent of someone else's cologne. Just jasmine, my jasmine, the perfume I used to wear before Victor changed it. I took it out of the drawer that night. Sprayed once. Let it settle on my wrist. Then I poured a glass of wine, stood by the window, and watched the city lights flicker like a heartbeat. This was my home, my quiet empire. I wasn't a woman hiding anymore. I was a woman becoming. The only thing left now was to choose how he would find out. Because one thing was certain. He would. It began with a knock. Not a loud one. Not the kind Victor used to announce his presence with power. This one was cautious, curious. I already knew it was him. I'd seen the alert from Farah the day before. He filed. He's assuming you'll settle quietly. Of course he did. Men like Victor don't imagine a world where they don't win. They only calculate how long until they do. I opened the door slowly, and there he was, standing in a tailored coat, freshly shaved, holding a folder like it was some kind of victory. The same cologne, the same smirk. But something in his eyes flickered. Just for a second, and when he saw the loft. Nice place, he said, scanning the room. Didn't expect this. You finally hire a decorator? I smiled politely. Come in. He walked in like he owned the air. I gestured toward the table. 2 mugs, fresh coffee, steam rising between us. He didn't sit. Just dropped the folder on the table with a dramatic sigh. Let's make this easy. I figured you'd want a quick settlement. You keep your little studio. I keep the assets. We can avoid court. I nodded slowly. You're right. I do want this to be easy. I pulled open the drawer and took out a crisp envelope, heavy paper, sealed with gold wax. Farah's style. Elegant and absolute. Victor's eyebrows twitched. What's that? Before I could answer, the door opened again. Farah stepped in, calm, deliberate, dressed in navy and power. Behind her, a court officer followed. Victor blinked. What the hell is this? Farah spoke first. Mr. Hale, we've filed a countersuit. Fraud, concealment of marital assets, emotional abuse. You've been served. He laughed. Laughed like a man grasping for control. This is ridiculous. But his voice cracked. Farah placed another document on the table. We've gathered evidence from your offshore accounts, multiple falsified LLCs, and emails to your accountant instructing transfers under pseudonyms. We have the screenshots, the metadata. I watched Victor pale, not dramatically, just a subtle drain in his face, like someone opened a hidden door and let the heat out. He looked at me, for the first time in years, really looked. You planned this? He whispered. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled something from my bag. A photograph, faded at the edges, creased once down the middle. I slid it toward him. He looked down. It was a picture of a sketch, my first studio layout, drawn in the little in-room under the glow of a desk lamp. In the bottom corner, M. Ray Designs. His eyes flicked up. This is you? You've heard of it, haven't you? I said softly. Small firm, gaining traction. Lena's Cafe, Amber Atelier, Valet Retreat. He nodded. Stiff. Silent. That was me. All of it. Silence stretched between us like silk. Thin. Untearable. You never asked, I said. Not once. What I wanted. What I was capable of. You just assumed I'd vanish. He tried to regroup. Straighten his spine. You think a few freelance jobs and a studio means you can take me down? I leaned back, calm, grounded. The Lamborghini parked downstairs. It's mine, bought in full, registered in my name. I designed every inch of the brand. That paid for it. He scoffed. You bought a Lambo? To what? Show off? I shook my head. No, to drive. Because I could. Because the girl you laughed at, the one you silenced in soft ways and slow erasures, she finally remembered who she was. Farah stood. That will be all for today. Our team will contact yours. You're free to leave, or we can escort you out. Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. There were no more words that could save him. He gathered his folder. Slower now, like it weighed more than before. At the door, he paused. "You really don't need anything from me?" I met, his gaze steady. "I never did, I just forgot." After they left, I stayed in the quiet. The steam had faded from my coffee. I took a sip anyway. Bitter, grounding. Then I walked to the window. That same window where I'd watched the city lights like stars scattered at my feet. I held the mug Lena gave me, painted with a little fox and the word, "Still she rises." Outside, dusk settled in. The city shimmered. I thought of all the things I'd been told I was. Too soft. Too dependent. Too emotional. Too fragile. But here I was. Not burned. Not broken. Rewritten. Not louder. Just clearer. A life that didn't need to be proven. Just lived. I didn't need revenge. I had a legacy, and I signed the checks.